Mission Impossible, in my opinion, is the greatest action franchise of all time, and last weekend, the 8th and final film in the franchise was released. So, let's rank them all. In last place is Mission Impossible 2. Now, this movie is really just a product of its time, as the John Woo early 2000s action style is in full force here, and while it might have been received quite well on release, this one has not stood the test of time. There is little of substance here, and it's all just highly stylized action with not much else to it. The plot is super thin, and the runtime is dragged out by an outrageous amount of slow motion shots. I think the movie is summed up by the rock climbing sequence at the start of the movie. There isn't much reason at all for this scene to exist other than having slow motion shots of Tom Cruise doing a stunt. There is quite literally no plot reason at all behind this, and it only exists because in the early 2000s it was seen as cool, which I guess can be said for the rest of the movie as well. This is probably the only film on this list that I have no interest at all in rewatching, and I think this is quite a bad action movie. Coming in at number 7 is the original Mission Impossible. This is just a solid spy movie, and that's all there really is to say about it. It has a great style and some cool set pieces like the Black Vault break-in. The plot is simple, yet quite messy, and it's just a pretty simple version of a spy plot. There isn't much of a team dynamic here, and the movie is very focused on Ethan. There are some fun twists and a decent villain, but ultimately this one feels out of place with the rest of the franchise. And ultimately I prefer the big stunts and action of the later movies than a more low-key spy movie that is on offer here. So while this isn't a bad movie, and I can see why some might have this high on their list, it ends up losing in a battle of styles for me. Coming in at number 6 is the new one, Final Reckoning. Now, obviously this could move on the list based on rewatches since I've only been able to see it once. I'm not actually 100% sure how to feel about this one. The vibe and tone of this one feels so different to what I've come to expect from the franchise, and it almost feels out of place, which is strange, considering it's got the same creative team and is supposed to be a follow-up to Dead Reckoning. I don't particularly like what was done with the characters in this movie either. It kind of pushes them to the side. There's not much development for the characters here, except for Ethan. It clearly wants to put all the focus on Ethan, as it drags up many things about his past in an effort to make this seem like a big ending of the franchise, but it just ends up bogging this movie down to the point where there's not much going on with the actual plot, and things just seem to happen to drag out the runtime. It feels weirdly disconnected from Dead Reckoning, as things just change with not much explanation between the movies. The first half of the movie is extremely boring, and to be honest, it felt like this movie dragged on forever. Considering this is kind of the second part of the story, with Dead Reckoning being the first part, you'd expect that most of the setup is done there, but no, literally a half, at least, of this movie is devoted to just straight setup, and that is it. The underwater scene did breathe some life back into the movie. That was my favourite part of it, but it felt like there was way too much runtime left after this finished, as it spends a good amount of time trying to make this feel like the most impossible mission they've ever been on. But it feels super forced, where things just keep going wrong just so they can keep the movie going on longer, and it makes the task feel harder and harder. By the time we reached the third act, I was actually just waiting for it to be over, and the plane sequence at the end, which a lot of people have been raving about, it didn't actually do that much for me, even though it is an impressive stunt. After being set up as an intriguing villain in Dead Reckoning, I think Gabriel is just terrible in this movie, and is only there as just a guy to beat, since you can't actually do any interesting action with the Entity, which is the main villain of this movie. This one really disappointed me, and I just can't understand some of the decisions they made for it. Coming in at number 5 is Mission Impossible 3. Now, this is a big jump in quality from Final Reckoning, I think. This was kind of the first movie in the franchise to push it in the direction that Mission Impossible would become known for. I think exploring Ethan's personal life and having him get dragged back into missions after being retired is quite an enticing plot point, to be honest, and Julia's inclusion makes the story more personal and ups the stakes for Ethan in particular. Especially the opening interrogation scene that they come back to later in the film. I think all that works really well and is one of the best parts of the entire franchise for me. There's some fun infiltration style action here where they go to the Vatican, and it has a nice mix of some spy stuff as well as big action like the bridge scene. So I think it walks the line quite well of the old, more spy orientated type of action, as well as the modern, more stunt type of action. I think the star of the show here is Philip Seymour Hoffman as the best villain in the franchise. He seems to have our protagonist beat at every turn, and he's just so dark, willing to do anything to get what he wants. And it really makes things difficult for our protagonists, making the victory so much sweeter when they finally bring him down. Now, the films that came after it definitely improved on the formula, so it can't go any higher on the list, but this one certainly nudged the franchise in the right direction. Coming at number 4 is Dead Reckoning, kind of the first part of our finale. And from here on out, all these movies are top tier and have few negatives about them, so we're splitting hairs at this point. A lot of these movies could change on any different day. This one does something different with the plot and villain, as the villain is a sentient AI that is taking over cyberspace, which is a refreshing change even though they did waste it in Final Reckoning. And the plot here is all about retrieving a key, which kind of sends our characters on a wild goose chase throughout the movie, which is fun and different from a lot of what we've seen in this franchise. The stakes are high here, and the set pieces are something special. The airport scene is great fun with plenty of action and diversion, having the team have to help Ethan whilst also dealing with the nuclear bomb that Benji has to defuse really gets this off to a good start. And Grace is also introduced here as a thief who ends up getting caught up in something bigger than she thought it was, which is a fun dynamic. This is followed with a classic Mission Impossible car chase, which injects a good amount of action into the movie, and the third act here is fantastic as well. This movie works well on its own, but I do think it should have had its own beginning and end, as it feels so disconnected from Final Reckoning that I don't think there was any need to actually make this a two-part story. Beginning the top 3 is Ghost Protocol. Now this one and number 2 are extremely close, and on another day they definitely could have switched around. But what ultimately lets this one down is the third act and the villain. The villain is so forgettable that I actually could not tell you the name right now, and the third act seems to just run out of steam after a very fast-paced first 2 acts. The first 2 acts of this film play out almost like a highlight reel, just going from great sequence to great sequence. What this really does great is make a good mix of stunts and spy stuff. This is the film that really introduced the big stunts that Mission Impossible would become known for, with the Burj Khalifa sequence of course, but also uses a lot of exciting spy gadgets, like in the Kremlin break-in, which the later films after this begin to neglect. The cast and team here is fantastic, and this is where the team becomes more important and the movie puts less of a focus on just Ethan Hunt. He probably has the best opening sequence of any movie in the franchise, with some great action in a prison break scene. It then manages to introduce the team and the plot well without too much exposition, and quickly moves into the Kremlin infiltration, which is a great spy sequence. And then of course we get the great big stunt of the movie, where we're climbing the Burj Khalifa, which still could be the best stunt in the whole franchise. If this one had stuck the landing in the third act, then it could easily have been the best on the list, but unfortunately, it didn't. Our runner-up here is Rogue Nation. This is the first one directed by Macquarie, and he shows an immediate vision and direction in this film, and the world definitely feels more connected from this point onwards. I think this movie has the perfect team here with Luther, Benji and Brandt. This is the only movie with all 3 of them in like a main team role. This movie also introduces Ilsa, who instantly became a fan favourite and elevated all the movies she's in after it. It opens with an extremely fun sequence, where Ethan's hanging on a plane, and it shows some good team aspects, everyone getting involved. And it quickly introduces the character dynamics, and I love how they interact with each other here. Tom Cruise hanging onto a moving plane is a great stunt, and the opening sets the movie up nicely. I think the mission briefing being compromised by the Syndicate is great. The mission briefing is a part of every single Mission Impossible movie, and this puts a twist early in the movie that you just don't see coming, and it sets up a formidable villain. We also first see our villain of the movie, Solomon Lane, in this scene, who I also think is one of the best villains in the franchise. The IMF is decommissioned and our protagonist must work outside of any government organisation. Now this has been done before, but I always think this plotline is good and improves the movies. This one is just effortlessly fun and doesn't have a second of unimportant downtime. The action here is some of the best in the whole franchise, and that is what we come to these movies for at the end of the day. The stunts here might not be as big as climbing on the Burj Khalifa, but they are unique and fun in their own right. I love the underwater sequence where they have to replace the keycard. This is one of the funniest films in the franchise as well, but it doesn't compromise any serious plot points and manages to walk the line perfectly. This one feels like it took all the best parts of the previous movies in this franchise and was able to combine them all for the ultimate Mission Impossible style that would be used for every film after it. But coming in at number 1 is Fallout, the follow-up to Rogue Nation and the first film in this franchise to have a repeat director. I think this ends up being a good thing, as I said before, it feels really connected to Rogue Nation. This one feels like a true sequel instead of just another adventure with the same characters. I think bringing back Solomon Lane and having him work with the mysterious John Mark works very well, and while the identity of our villain wasn't hidden all that well, I think the twist ultimately works out and adds a great deal to the movie. The characters here are fantastic, and Henry Cavill puts in a great performance as our villain. I like that the team is very involved here, and they're all well used in one of my favourite scenes in the franchise when Benji poses as Lane to get Walker to reveal himself as the villain. That is classic Mission Impossible spy stuff. It's these little twists and turns that set apart Mission Impossible from any other action franchise. The action here is at its peak, and the Halo jump is a personal favourite stunt of mine. The plot here is nothing new, but Mission Impossible always finds enough twists and turns to keep it feeling fresh. I think bringing back Ethan's wife here was an inspired decision and really upped the emotion brought out in the third act. Speaking of the third act here is nearly perfect, and I think it sets the standard for how action movies should be made. And I do think this might be the best action movie of all time. This is one of my favourite franchises of all time. And even though it's called Final Reckoning and all that, I do hope that they make more movies here. I know that there was talk before the movie came out that they were developing more ideas, and I do hope they follow through with that, because even though I wasn't a big fan of The Final Reckoning, I think the quality is still going to be there. That's the end of this video. Please leave your list in the description. I know that this franchise, more than most, can go in any order. I've seen so many different lists with all these films mixed up. Everyone's list is different, so please leave yours down there and we can have a conversation about it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.